Welcome to Hard Script.
She flinched when I touched her. It happened in the kitchen, under the soft yellow light that never quite reached the corners. She had just come home from the office, still in her heels, still carrying the smell of coffee and printer ink, and something sharper that did not belong to our apartment. I stepped behind her while she stood at the sink scrolling through her phone. My hand landed gently on her shoulder, the way it always had after long days. The reaction was instant. Her body jerked forward as if the touch burned. The glass in her hand tapped hard against the sink. She turned around too fast and smiled too wide. She said she was just tired. She said deadlines were brutal. She said the agency was drowning in late-night presentations. Her phone buzzed in her hand before she could set it down. The name on the screen lit up the room for half a second. Ethan. She flipped the phone face down and laughed at nothing. She said her junior designer could not finish a layout without her. She said young creatives needed constant supervision. I nodded and stepped back. She returned to rinsing a glass that was already clean. Dinner stayed untouched on the table while she answered emails. She said the pitch was in the morning and the team might need her online later. She said she would probably work from the couch. When I passed behind her again, I did not reach out. Later, she fell asleep with her laptop open beside her. A notification slid across the screen before it dimmed. Ethan had sent a message with a photo attached. The preview showed the corner of a conference room and her reflection in the window. The caption read that the office looked better at night. I closed the laptop without waking her and grabbed my keys from the counter. That was the first night I did not come home. I drove straight to my studio across town, the one I used for late planning sessions and community proposals. It sat above a closed bookstore, quiet after dark, with wide windows overlooking an empty plaza I had helped redesign years ago. I unlocked the door and left the lights off. My phone buzzed once while I stood by the drafting table. Claire's name flashed across the screen. She asked if I had left already. She said she had woken up and the apartment was quiet. She added that she assumed I had an early site visit. I replied that I was at the studio. She sent back a thumbs up and a short message about her pitch. She said Ethan had stayed late again to help polish the slides. She wrote that he was talented but needed guidance. I did not respond after that. In the morning, I showered in the small bathroom down the hall and changed into a clean shirt I kept in the storage cabinet. I told myself it was temporary, just space. Back at the apartment later that day, she was gone. The bed was made. Her side of the closet looked untouched. My side felt crowded. On the kitchen counter, her tablet was charging. A notification popped up while I stood there. Ethan had sent a voice memo. The preview text read that he missed the energy from the night before. I did not open it. Instead, I packed a small duffel bag with more clothes and carried it down to my car. I told her by text that I would be working late all week. She replied that she understood. She added that things were intense at the agency and she might not be home much either. That evening, I drove past her office building before heading back to the studio. Most floors were dark. One corner office still had the lights on. Two silhouettes moved inside. I did not park. I did not get out. I just kept driving and did not turn around. The second night turned into the third without discussion. Claire texted in the mornings asking if I had eaten. She sent photos of mood boards and color palettes from the agency, as if nothing between us had shifted. She wrote that Ethan had finally nailed the typography on the presentation and that the client loved their chemistry as a team. I stayed at the studio and signed a long-term proposal for a redevelopment project in a district on the other side of the city. The contract required on-site coordination for months. I told the city planning office I would relocate my base of operations closer to the new project. By the end of the week, I had moved 2 boxes of documents and half my wardrobe into the studio closet. I updated my mailing address for professional correspondence. I changed the delivery settings for my bank statements. Each step took minutes. Claire noticed my absence only in fragments. She asked why there were fewer shirts in the closet. She asked why my boots were missing. I told her I was keeping essentials at the studio because of the new contract. She replied that it made sense. She added that she barely slept at home anymore either. One afternoon, I stopped by the apartment to pick up a roll of drawings I had left behind. The place smelled different, not like our detergent or her perfume. Something faint and unfamiliar lingered in the air. Her laptop was open on the dining table. A presentation file filled the screen. In the corner, A small photo window showed her and Ethan sitting too close, reviewing slides. His hand rested on the back of her chair, not professional, not accidental. I did not make a sound. Later that evening, she texted to say the team might stay overnight at the office again to finalize another campaign. She added a tired smile emoji. I typed that I would be at the studio. She replied with a simple question. She asked when I was coming home. When she asked when I was coming home, I let the message sit unanswered until the next morning. Then I replied that the new site required me nearby and that I would be staying at the studio for a while. I did not add anything else. She sent back a longer message this time. She said the apartment felt strange without me. She said she had told Ethan that her husband was buried in city projects and barely noticed when she worked late. She wrote it like a joke, but there was something tight in the wording. I read it once and set the phone down. At the planning office, I finalized the extension of my contract and signed for additional responsibilities that would anchor me in that district for months. I authorized equipment deliveries to the studio address. I redirected a few personal subscriptions there as well. Each change was small on its own. Together, they shifted the center of my life. That evening, I drove past the apartment building again. Her car was there, so it was another one I had seen outside her office before. The windows in our unit were lit. I did not go upstairs. The next day, Claire showed up at the studio without warning. She knocked lightly before stepping inside, looking around as if she had entered a place she did not fully recognize. She said she had finished early and wanted to see where I had been staying. I told her it was temporary. She walked through the space, touching the drafting table, glancing at the boxes stacked along the wall. She asked why there were so many clothes here. She asked why my framed photos were leaning against the brick. I told her I needed focus. Her phone buzzed while she stood near the window. Ethan's name appeared again. She silenced it quickly. She asked if this distance was about her long hours. I looked at her for a moment and said no. She waited for more. I did not give it. After that visit, she stopped pretending it was temporary. Her messages changed tone. She asked if I was avoiding her. She asked if something had happened that she did not know about. She wrote that the team at the agency had noticed she seemed distracted. She blamed the pressure of the new campaign. I stayed at the studio and continued moving pieces quietly. I transferred my primary bank registration to the new address. I updated the insurance policy. I scheduled a consultation with an attorney recommended by a colleague from the planning department. The meeting was short and direct. I did not describe emotions. I described facts. Claire began coming home earlier, or at least she said she did. One afternoon, she sent a photo of our empty living room and wrote that it felt too quiet. She asked if I could come by for dinner. She added that Ethan had taken over some of her workload so she could leave on time. That evening, I stopped by the apartment without warning. She opened the door quickly, almost relieved. The place was cleaner than usual, candles lit on the table. She stepped closer as if to hug me, then hesitated. The hesitation was small, but visible. I moved past her into the living room. Her phone was charging on the kitchen counter. A message preview appeared while we stood there. Ethan had written that he missed the way she focused on him when the office was empty. He had added that the nights felt different without her. She saw the notification at the same moment I did. She reached for the phone too fast and knocked over the candle. Wax spilled across the counter. She said it was nothing. She said he was being dramatic about deadlines. I looked at her and said I would not be staying. She followed me to the door and asked what she had done. I told her it was not about what she had done. It was about what she had stopped doing. The following week, I sent the official notice. It was not dramatic. It was a formal document delivered through email and certified mail, stating the initiation of divorce proceedings. No accusations. No explanations. Just a request for equitable separation and instructions for future communication through counsel. Claire called within minutes of receiving it. I let it go to voicemail. She left a message asking if this was some kind of strategy to get her attention. She said she did not understand how things had escalated so quickly. Later that evening, she showed up at the studio again. This time she did not knock softly. She stood in the doorway, eyes red, holding the printed notice in her hand. She said she had given Ethan too much responsibility and that boundaries had blurred. She said nothing physical had happened that meant anything. She said the late nights were about pressure and adrenaline and creative chaos. Her phone buzzed in her pocket while she spoke. She ignored it. I walked to the drafting table and continued reviewing site plans. She asked if this was about one message. She asked if I was jealous of a younger designer who needed her guidance. She said I was overreacting to stress. I turned toward her and asked when she had last come home without smelling like someone else's cologne layered under her own. She went quiet. The silence lasted long enough for her phone to buzz again. This time she looked at the screen. Ethan's name flashed across it, followed by a short message asking if she was safe to talk. She lowered the phone slowly. I told her that the first night I stayed at the studio had not been about anger. It had been about clarity. I told her that the moment she flinched in our kitchen was the moment something ended. She stepped closer and asked if there was any way back. I did not step away. I simply said there had not been a way back for a while. After that night at the studio, she stopped defending it as harmless. Instead, she started explaining. She sent long emails describing how it began with a presentation that ran late. She wrote that Ethan had stayed behind to help refine a pitch deck and that the office had felt electric after everyone else left. She said he admired her leadership and creativity. She said it was flattering to be needed in a way that felt immediate. I did not respond. A few days later, she called again and left a different kind of message. She said Ethan had panicked when he heard about the divorce filing. She said he told her he never meant for things to go this far. She said he was worried about his position at the agency if rumors spread. That afternoon, a mutual acquaintance who worked in the same building as Claire stopped by one of my public planning presentations. After the meeting, he pulled me aside and said the agency had reassigned Ethan to another team. He mentioned that someone had noticed how often he and Claire stayed overnight in the office together. He said HR had questions. I thanked him and left without asking for details. Claire showed up at the studio again, but this time she looked smaller, stripped of her usual sharp confidence. She said Ethan had distanced himself to protect his job. She said he told colleagues their connection had been misinterpreted. She said he described it as mentorship that had been taken out of context. She asked if I was satisfied now. I told her I had not spoken to anyone at her agency. I told her the consequences were not mine to manage. She stood near the window and said she had thought I would fight for her, argue, demand answers. She said my silence felt worse. I turned back to the blueprints on the table. Outside, the plaza lights I had installed flickered on one by one. Inside, she waited for a reaction that did not come. The agency fallout did not explode in public, but it shifted her world. Claire was removed from leading the upcoming campaign she had spent months shaping. The official explanation was structural reorganization, but she knew why. She told me during one of her last visits to the studio that the creative director had suggested she take time to recalibrate her priorities. She said Ethan had requested a transfer to another branch across the city. She said he avoided eye contact in meetings and no longer stayed late. She described the office as colder now, conversations quieter when she walked into a room. I kept working. I finalized the lease extension for the studio and added a small furnished apartment above it for long-term stays. I moved the last of my personal items out of our shared apartment and into storage. The divorce process moved forward without drama, documents exchanged through attorneys without raised voices. One evening, she came to the studio again, but this time she did not step inside immediately. She stood at the threshold and looked around as if trying to measure how permanent everything had become. She said the apartment felt empty even when she was inside it. She said the silence there pressed against her in ways she had not expected. She said she kept replaying that moment in the kitchen when she pulled away from my hand. I did not look up from the plans spread across the table. She asked if I had already replaced her in my life. She asked if there was someone else waiting in this new space. I told her there was no one else. She nodded slowly, then asked why I seemed so calm. I set my pen down and met her eyes. I told her calm had started the night she flinched. She took a step back as if the word itself carried weight. For the first time, she did not argue. As the weeks moved forward, the paperwork reached its final stages. Claire stopped coming to the studio unannounced. Instead, she sent shorter messages that felt restrained, almost formal. She asked about logistics, about dividing furniture, about timelines. Her tone no longer carried urgency, only something heavier. One afternoon, I had to meet the property manager at the apartment we once shared to finalize the transfer of my name from the lease. Claire was already there when I arrived. She stood in the living room surrounded by half-packed boxes. The walls were bare where our photos used to hang. She said the agency had reassigned her to a smaller account. She said Ethan had fully transferred to another branch and no longer contacted her outside of work. She described it without emotion, like reporting a fact to a client. While the manager reviewed the documents, Claire walked into the kitchen and rested her hands on the counter. She looked at the spot where she had flinched weeks earlier. She asked if that moment had truly been enough to end a marriage. I told her it had not been the moment alone. She waited. I said it had been what the moment revealed. She pressed her lips together and nodded, as if confirming something she already knew. The manager returned with the signed forms. I handed over my keys without hesitation. Claire watched the exchange as if it were happening to someone else. When I walked toward the door, she asked if I ever considered staying and fighting for us. She asked if silence had been easier than confrontation. I paused only long enough to answer. I told her I had not stopped coming home to punish her. I had stopped because I no longer belonged there. Then I stepped outside and let the door close behind me for the last time. The divorce was finalized without a courtroom scene, without raised voices, without anyone begging for a last chance in a hallway. Papers were signed. Accounts were separated. Names were removed from shared records. I moved fully into the apartment above the studio. The plaza outside filled each evening with people who did not know my history. I worked longer hours on the redevelopment project, walking the site with contractors, reviewing materials, approving lighting plans that would shape the way the neighborhood looked for years. One evening, as the new fixtures were being tested, Claire showed up one last time. She stood near the edge of the plaza, watching the lights flicker on in sequence. She did not try to approach until I noticed her. When she did, her steps were slower than before, no urgency left in them. She said she had transferred to a different department at the agency. She said she had asked for smaller projects, fewer late nights. She said she understood now that ambition without boundaries had cost her more than she expected. I listened without interrupting. She asked if I had ever doubted my decision. She asked if there had been a moment when I almost came back home. I told her the first night at the studio had not been about leaving her. It had been about stepping away from something that no longer felt honest. I told her that when she pulled away from my touch, I saw the distance before she ever said it out loud. She lowered her eyes and said she had flinched because she carried someone else's presence into our kitchen. She said she had felt it and hoped I had not. I looked at the row of lights stretching across the plaza. I told her I had noticed. She waited for more, but there was nothing else to add. When I walked back toward the studio entrance, she did not call my name. This time, she let me go.